community and work at a national and local level. A big supporter of the Blueprint Coalition. So I'm your chair for the day. I'd like to say thank you so much for spending the next hour with us to talk about how devolution can deliver on environmental ambition. We've got a fantastic panel today from a range of councils and NGOs who are experts in this with practical experience to share their insights. And the format will be that we'll first get an introduction to what the Blueprint Coalition is from Blueprint co-chair Peter Moore, and then I'll introduce you to each of the panel members who'll speak for 5 minutes. During that time, I'd invite you to put any questions you have into the chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat and then picking out the most relevant questions to pose to our panel. So the panelists will each have 5 minutes, and that should leave us a good amount of time for questions. So we're here, we've got devolution gathering pace. We've got a new bill set out in the King's Speech to try to tackle the inconsistencies in the deal-based devolution that we've seen to date, and to give further powers to 2 areas. And that's really important because our mayoral and combined authority areas really influence a large amount of what we can do to tackle climate and nature crises, with 1/3 of emissions produced in those mayoral or combined authority areas, and metro mayors being responsible for developing local nature recovery strategies, just as counties are. And we've got Marissa here from Surrey County Council. But some of the recent deals we've seen have really pushed ahead with powers around public transport, skills, and specifically for Greater Manchester and West Midlands, we've seen retrofit and other things we can do to tackle our emissions. So in this session today, we'll be discussing, as we lead into that new devolution deal, the progress metro mayors have made to date on nature and climate, and the opportunities new deals can bring. And then we'll be highlighting national resourcing, regulation, and policy changes that could accelerate our climate action at this level. Critically, we want to make sure no local authorities or no people in areas are left behind as well. So what we don't want is one lot rushing ahead with devolution and somebody else languishing in the background where those people don't get the benefits. So Peter will go on to what the asks are. We'll be pulling together the findings of this session and feeding that back into the local government, press, and presumably, Peter, to government as well, who should be all ears. And I noticed that Tom has left, not our Tom here, but Tom from Leeds City Council has gone to work with Angela Rayner. So we've got local authority people in each of the ministries now, which is good. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Peter Moore to give you an introduction to the Blueprint Coalition. Peter.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thanks all of you for joining for this important and timely discussion. My name is Peter Moore, as Louise said. Until 2 weeks ago, I was head of climate strategy at Reading Borough Council. And since last week, I've been head of portfolio and strategy in the Environment and Communities Directorate at Westminster City Council. 2 councils, I'm pleased to say, have a pretty good track record of action on climate change. But I'm not speaking to you today in either of those capacities. I'm speaking in my capacity as co-chair of the Blueprint Coalition. So the Coalition is a group of local government organisations, environmental groups and research institutions which first came together in 2020 to publish a blueprint for accelerating action on climate and nature at local level. We've refreshed and updated our manifesto to reflect changing circumstances since then, but the basic tenets, which I'll return to shortly, have stood the test of time pretty well. And essentially, the Coalition is calling on central government to support local authorities in delivering action on climate mitigation and adaptation with a joined-up approach that helps nature recovery and tackles inequalities across the country. In our latest refresh, we've identified 5 immediate priorities for the new government, which was elected in July. First, to ensure that all devolution agreements include ambitious plans and devolve powers and resources for place-based action to reduce carbon emissions, build climate resilience and restore nature. Second, to strengthen the proposed duty to produce local growth plans by requiring them to be local sustainable growth plans that prioritise investment in low carbon sectors and enable a transition to higher quality, better paid employment through reskilling, retraining and research. Third, to ensure that high standards for new build and environmental enhancement are at the heart of planning reform and that investment in warmer homes is forthcoming at the pace and scale required, with flexibility in local implementation to tackle fuel poverty and improve public health outcomes. Fourth, to shift the emphasis within transport policy still further and transport spend, indeed, to encourage modal shift, including active travel infrastructure, reversing the decline in bus services, whilst also investing in existing infrastructure assets. And fifth, to accelerate policy investment to deliver local nature-based solutions, not just tree planting, but restoration of peatland, freshwater, coastal and other habitats in order to meet 2030 targets for nature, to increase climate resilience and to ensure that both people and wildlife have access to high quality green and blue space. And I think it's fair to say we've been encouraged by the steps that the new government has taken in most, if not all of those areas. And the coalition certainly welcomes the government's recognition of the need for a place-based approach with adequate funding and support through its devolution commitments. We welcome particularly the commitment to reform and devolve funding streams, in particular the promise to move away from competitive funding streams for action on climate and nature. But we're very clear that that reform needs to result in clearly defined roles and responsibilities, long-term stable funding with local flexibility so that local authorities can act at the scale and pace required. So it's a positive start, but at the same time, I think we're mindful of the risks, principally ensuring that a dash for growth is a dash for sustainable growth, that this area of policy is given the priority it deserves, even at a time of tight public spending constraint, and in the context of today's discussion, ensuring that action on climate and nature are hardwired into the devolution process, and that the benefits of that process and the support needed to enable local action on climate and nature are, as Louise said, universally available, and not just focused on those areas fortunate enough to be at the front of the queue for more ambitious devolution deals. And I think the reason for that last demand is pretty clear. There is not a local authority area in the land that doesn't need to dramatically reduce its carbon emissions, or that will be spared the impacts of the climate and nature emergencies. And moreover, empowering local authorities is not a nice to have, it's essential. Committee on Climate Change have said that, and we've been saying that. Most local authorities have already developed plans to address the climate and ecological crises, and they know that the best solutions require a joined up approach. They urgently need the powers and resources to scale up action, and the benefits are indisputable, including better health and well-being, improved access to nature, tackling inequalities, creating jobs and supporting resilient local economies. And of course, we know, don't we, that the cost of inaction vastly outweighs the cost of action. So very much looking forward to hearing the thoughts of our eminent panel of speakers who are very much at the forefront of the devolution discussion on how government can ensure that devolution delivers on climate and nature. Thank you, Louise.
Thanks so much, Peter. And I can see the first question appearing in the chat, which is brilliant. So thank you, Laurie, for that. So next we'll move on to our panel. So we've asked the speakers to address the question, what does the new government need to do differently to ensure that new and existing devolution agreements deliver more effectively on the climate and nature crisis, as I outlined earlier. So first I think I'll run you through who's on the panel. You might have seen this before, but I'll tell you the whole panel, then I'll bring in Tom. So on our panel, we've got Councillor Tom Ross, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority Green City Lead. He's based at Trafford Council. We've got a combined authority who's got a trailblazer deal there. We've got Councillor Marissa Heath, Cabinet Member for Environment from Surrey County Council. So you've got a county there, the two-tier system with their district and county, who'd negotiated a level 2 deal with the previous government. So they're thinking, now what? So that's a different lot. We've got Christopher Hammond, Chief Executive Officer for UK 100, the coalition of local authorities who are ambitious to tackle climate change, or whatever the actual strapline is that Chris will correct me on. And then we've got Victoria Marsom, head of the England team for Friends of the Earth. So that's our panel. So we'll start now to invite Councillor Tom Ross to tell us what's working well in Greater Manchester, the existing powers, and what's the trailblazer going to do for us. Over to you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise, and good morning, everyone. As Louise has alluded to, Greater Manchester went into a trailblazer deal back in spring of 2023 with the previous government. So I think in terms of answering the question that's been posed, what a lot of the new government could do is learn from some of the more advanced devolution deals that are in place. So Greater Manchester's is one of the more advanced out of the English regions, and has given us the ability to have a single settlement where we can move monies between the 5 key pillars, policy pillars that we have at a GM level. When we look at the environmental level, there's a lot going on within the Greater Manchester space. The B network, which includes buses as the headline from that initiative. Cheaper buses that have lower emissions, that are more attractive. We want to make sure we build that network, as we have been doing since September last year, to ensure that more people use those buses. And the early information we have through where that has taken place in the B network has come in, we've seen patronage go up, which is very encouraging. But it's not just about public transport, it's about making sure we've got our active travel offer in place and people are able to walk, wheel and cycle around the conurbation as part of the network there. So we work with our active travel commissioner, Dame Sarah Story, who has been in the news recently, you'll see from the Paralympics, to build an accessible network that will encourage more people to take that step away from the car onto bikes or to walk safely around places. Skills has been mentioned already. There's a lot that the government can learn from what we're doing with skills in Greater Manchester. We have a Green Skills Academy in place. We are looking to the future in terms of future jobs, green jobs. An example very close to where I am now is a Trafford College initiative where future tradespeople are being skilled up in how to install and maintain heat pumps and other sustainable and alternative energy provision for housing, recognizing that that will be a real need in the future. We have got the pilot of devolution on net zero spending. So that includes the spending on buildings retrofit, advice on energy efficiency. We are the Trailblazer allows us to build on our local area energy plans, investigating alternative energy provision. Where I'm sat at the moment, we're looking at what energy we can use from the sewage system to help drive a civic district heat network. I think the government can learn from, in terms of future devolution deals, from some of the tripartite stuff we're doing and cross-organisational initiatives we're taking. So the integrated water management plan, which is an arrangement between us, the Environment Agency and United Utilities, to look at the condition of the weather. There's torrential rain behind me, which is a reflection of climate change and what's happening to our weather. How we have urban drainage systems, flood management integrated into our future growth, our future housing developments, how we do things differently there. And we also have the local nature recovery strategy that we're working on at the moment, which is a reflection of our state of nature report that we brought to Greater Manchester Combined Authority over around 2 years ago now. I think it was before my time coming into this role, but it was a very powerful report which we are looking to reflect on in our nature recovery strategy. All of this comes under the umbrella of our 5-year environment plan, which we are working on a new incarnation of to launch our Green Summit in the end of the year. Partners have been currently feeding into that plan to make sure that we get it as good as possible. So I'd say, conscious of time, in sum, there is a lot going on in Greater Manchester. We're very happy to expand on it in the Q&A section, but what the government could learn from us is the good things that we've been doing for a long time here in GM, how that could be adopted in other devolution deals, having a degree of consistency, recognising that all areas are slightly different, so there'll need to be some tailor making for different areas, having that trust with the local authority so that government departments aren't battling for cash with the devolution areas. And yes, hopefully we'll have a really positive engagement with the new government in terms of what can be done at a local level, because there is so much knowledge down at a GM level, which I know will be replicated across other areas of the United Kingdom, but particularly in England.
Fantastic, Tom, and spot on 5 minutes, so top marks. Thank you so much. And I can attest to the new yellow buses running better, and the way that we work as a partnership in Greater Manchester Combined Authority. There's a very high level of trust there. I think there'll be some good sharing as to how to build that and break down those silos. But I think one of the key things is that ability to move money between that freedom, which we know can give greater value for money, because there's not necessarily more money available. So next, I'd like to invite Councillor Marissa Heath, Cabinet Member for the Environment from Surrey County Council. So to get your insights. Thanks, Marissa.
Thank you, Louise. I mean, you said it in the intro. What do we need the new government to do now, and what are we expecting? We're in the kind of position of not being sure what's happening next. But if I just set the context for what we've asked for, that we believe will really expedite and improve our environmental delivery. During my time as cabinet member, I've seen so many numerous strands of work, and we've often felt like we're writing a lot of strategies and plans. And then the second part of it being a two-tier area is that we spend a huge amount of time telling numerous partner organisations and stakeholders about those strategies and seeking buy-in, and that buy-in varies in its success. What that has meant is it's taken a huge amount of resource, and it means that we're often jumping from one strategy to another. Trying to bring them all together into one coherent plan with an evidence-based outline is exactly what needs to be done. So if we put that to one side just for a moment and say the 25-year environmental plan sits at the forefront, or, you know, with the 10 goals, clean air, maximising our resources, clean and plentiful water, etc., etc., that all hooks into the wider work we as a local authority want to do, going back to the whole green jobs, green skills, land use planning, green finance, and it's all really important to us, not just as improving the environment, but actually in all sorts of other things like no one left behind, which is one of our key kind of positions that we want to have as a local authority. So we really recognise the environment plan is central to what we need to do, and we've got a strong role to play in it. But as I just mentioned, we've always got problems in delivering, and we can end up with quite a fragmented policy environment, and the numerous strategies I mentioned, that can be quite confusing, particularly to residents wanting to engage in our action groups and things. And there is often a bit of opaqueness about who's leading it ultimately as well. Put that alongside the fact that a county like Surrey is constantly looking at where the cuts are going to be pushed. The residents are pressing for good roads, social services pressures increasing, and that can destabilise some of our environmental plans. We've also found it quite difficult at Surrey. There's a lot of information out there, data, evidence sources that we're not getting hold of at the local level, and that's hindering our prioritisation alongside the competitive short-term restrictive funding that's already been mentioned in this conversation. So we've struggled, and we've struggled with the lack of mandate or duty around climate change and net zero as well, which means the prioritisation can be challenging, and the lack of join up between key partners, which could include utility companies, other government bodies, environmental forums, and the other levels of local government that we've got. And I think that that puts at risk the big picture thinking we need to have real impact in the environment, and really significantly the collective investment. So what you end up with is some great work, don't get me wrong, some really good stuff's been done, but it often is little projects with less scale and a huge amount of effort to get them moving. So our proposal, what we've asked government for, the previous government, and we're asking again, is the idea of local environmental improvement plans. And that would be a strategic, very locally focused and long-term framework, which would enable us to sustain our actions to address local environmental issues and really harness the benefits of those natural capital solutions that we all know give us so many opportunities. And what we would do through that piece of work is move into a really evidence-based view of what the key local to Surrey environmental issues are that enables our prioritisation, that supports our targeted local action, that facilitates good growth, speeding up planning processes, for example, reducing costs. And so our offer to government is that if we utilise an approach like this, we can provide that long-term approach, that long-term offer basically, that will negotiate a much more sustainable county place-based approach. It will give us the powers and the funding that will address both the national and the local priorities. And really, really valuably, it will leverage in both private and resident funding. Part of this plan we've outlined to government would include an environmental map, which would include hotspots that would support the planning system. It would support opportunity project development. We would look to have locally agreed evidence-based policies based on a kind of state of the local environment report, and development of a natural capital land management framework, which would really map out our local ecosystem services potential against the problems that we face and the natural capital solution opportunities. Now, land is one of the most valuable and important components to everything we want to do in Surrey, and being really clear on land use for investment and decision-making would expedite many other parts of the local authority's work as well. So yes, it would expedite our thinking around nature recovery and renewables, but also around planning and public access too. So we see that sort of clear strategy is really important to moving things forward so that we don't find ourselves sort of stuck in the mud, basically, having these big ideas and not being able to deliver it. And if we had that overarching approach and the authority to go with it, it would bring with us the agreed partnerships. We've already been testing MOUs with utility companies, but we'd see much more of that. We'd see the funding agreements, the communication engagement, and from the current position where it can take us months to try and get buy-in, and we're dealing with slow systems and going through several kind of different organisations, as I've mentioned, being two-tier, we would speed up decision making and delivery, and that is ultimately what residents want to see happen here. So what we're talking about in our deal is a framework for delivery, really, rather than a strategy, and about connecting the environment work into our local plans, into our health strategies, into our economic development. All of those existing plans, the local nature recovery strategy, our climate change strategy, our utility water plan, our public rights of way, our air quality management plans, our flood strategies would come together under this RIDE framework, and it would basically push all of those involved to have to deliver collaboratively and by sharing resource. So even a simple thing, I mean, last night I was speaking to a residents group about the LC WIP, local cycling walking infrastructure plans, and those are kind of being done separately in Surrey from the public rights of way or the air quality management or the school planning and the new development visions. You know, there's an awareness, but it's not being done in that strategic sort of thought out, we know where we are, let's move forward. So we've got to get that connection. I can give a couple of examples in the Q&A of how that would actually work. But the real purpose is basically we're asking for a mechanism that gives us the power to replace all of these existing small schemes and proposals and these small funding pots into a full master plan for Surrey. The lack of joining up is the problem we want to solve. And if we don't have a model for this, we're not going to solve all of our environmental issues. What we're going to carry on doing is solving one problem in one area, which can then cause a problem in another area. And this is particularly relevant to planning and the demand for more housing, which is going to challenge the environmental agenda to a huge extent across Surrey and I'm sure other areas as well. So that's what we're pushing for. That's our ask. And that's what we think works for Surrey.
Larissa, thank you so much for that. I'm sorry to stop you because it really we'll come back to some of the things you mentioned in the Q&A, and it does paint a different picture, doesn't it? Surrey versus Greater Manchester, which is sort of got the established working of 10 authorities that had a history of working together pretty well as they went into the combined authority and then have built on that. And you've got that, but it's not formalized, and it sounds like you've got a really interesting plan to bring those things together. And you face a different set of issues too, because you've got this sort of, it's interesting you're mentioning the land use, some kind of land use framework. So we've got all these national ones. We're expecting a land use framework, I think, from government at some point. That went a bit quiet, but enabling you to do that in a way that works in Surrey and is cohesive. And brings things together. So we'll come back to that. It's really interesting, isn't it? And that leads me neatly into introducing Chris. And UK 100 have done some excellent publications, some of which I wrote. But there's one on local net zero where we talk about this massive pressure on the land, in particularly sort of urban rural net zero, didn't we, Chris? And then we talk about the fragmented powers. So Chris, over to you for your thoughts.
Thank you, Louise. I'm going to set my own timer as well, just so that I do keep to time. Good morning, everybody. So I won't repeat what some of the already panelists have said. I think that we've had some brilliant contributions so far. I would recommend one report that people go away and read. If you was to just put a gun to my head and just say just one of all of our fantastic reports, but the Powers in Place Nature Report, because I think that really does highlight the scale of the challenge and the devastation that we've got in our natural economy in this country. 41% of species have been, we've seen a reduction of all species in this country since the 1970s. And there are some more horrifying statistics, around 90% reductions in the kind of the peatland restoration, all these kind of issues. So as far as nature is concerned, it is the thing that does galvanize people to be active in their communities. If you think about the polluted waterways, our polluted beaches, what people see around air pollution and clean air, these are things that people just won't tolerate in the same way that they may with some other kind of issues around net zero. They want to see action. They get angry and frustrated that these things have been allowed to happen. And local government has an absolutely crucial role in rectifying this. But, and I echo what Peter says, it's really encouraging. The new government wants to hit the ground running. It's impatient for change, and it's already, I think, given the sector some really positive signals. But in that is also some worrying and challenging kind of commentary. If you think about where the government is at the moment, they want their sort of raison d'etre is that economic growth needs to happen. Productivity and living standards in this country have either flatlined or declined. And we've got an economic strategy by the Chancellor, which is about constraining capital investment and revenue expenditure, not on everything, but as a whole in government spending. So alongside more frugality that we'll probably see from government, so every pound is going to need to go even further, and many public institutions and government bodies are going to have to do more with less. But there nevertheless is really big ambitions. 1.5 million homes. We got to think about where they go, and there's lots of different kind of competing interests and demands there. We need to look at reforming the planning process. We want to see a future home standard. I always, if you've got a problem, the first thing you do is stop adding to the problem. So we need to be building net zero homes now, really. The fact that we're going to have to retrofit a lot of new build homes that people have purchased just seems absolutely crazy in my mind's eye. The next thing you need to do is then start dealing with the problem that you've got, which is that retrofit piece. But where are these 1.5 million homes going to go? Are they going to be at a good environmental standard? And are they going to be beneficial to our natural economy and nature, or are they going to be an imposition? And are they going to be an imposition on communities that are probably already fed up of being told what to do and what's happening? Energy decarbonisation, really ambitious target by the government. Fantastic to see that real push on building on the successes in the energy sector. But who's going to love a pylon in their backyard? These are really going to be difficult things. How do we involve and engage the public in these big missions of government and local authorities? Again, are that trusted voice in their communities, are able to bring in those voices where they need to be. So trying to do some of these big changes and trying to build back that nature recovery with public services that were operating and financed well would be challenging. In a broken system with bureaucratic processes and really troubled kind of interventions in the past that haven't worked, this is going to be an even bigger task than I think a lot of people realize. People are fed up of decline. People are fed up of things being taken away with them. And you've seen all of the debate last night around the winter fuel allowance and how difficult that was. Energy bills are too high in this country for everybody, but some of these trade-offs that the government will have to make will be difficult. So thinking about how we get through, how we build back that nature recovery, it has to be local authorities that are leading that charge. It has to be through robust planning, I think that Marissa talked about, but we have to recognize that the opportunities and the challenges with a government that wants to move quickly and won't tolerate delay, and I'm concerned that local government could get the blame for delay in these systems that are really difficult to get moving to deliver these things. So we've got opportunities to really get going, and I think the devolution argument is really strong. Government recognises local authorities need a bigger role in driving economies, building back nature, and we have a chance as a sector to demand the powers, the funding to really make that step change is what's needed for nature.
Thanks so much, Christopher. You've really laid out some of those the tensions that are keeping us awake at night, I think. And so next is Victoria Marsom from Friends of the Earth. So Victoria, yeah, I'd be really interested in your view on how we bring that together. And I noticed on LinkedIn last night a list from somebody's name I've forgotten now, but a list of all the things NGOs are against. And it looked like everything. And I put a little note on going, what about all the things NGOs are for and how we don't have to just do trade-offs. So yeah, over to you, Victoria.
Thanks very much, Louise. It's great to be here. Good morning, everybody. I also mentioned that although I work for Friends of the Earth now, I'm about to hit my 6th-year anniversary, I have got a history background in working in local government in Liverpool City Council and at Watford Borough Council. So different tiers of local government. And I think that brings a really interesting perspective from where I sit and the work we've been doing at Friends of the Earth on this. And it's absolutely clear, obviously, that we are not going to meet the UK's legally binding targets on climate or nature without action as well from local government. And local government is best placed to work with local communities. I really want to emphasise that all the way through what I speak about, to ensure that the action taken protects the most vulnerable communities from the impacts of climate change. We know it's more effective for national government funding to be channeled into local place-based investment. And Friends of the Earth, as part of co-founding members of the Blueprint Coalition and as campaigners, we are always going to push government at every level to do more to tackle the climate and nature crises and address inequalities. But it's also really clear to us that local authorities, whether that's individual councils or mayoral combined authorities, could not act across the board at scale and pace required without changes to national policy and funding as well. And it's been great to see some of the questions coming in the chat actually similar to this. The previous government is left a really complex landscape in local government. Devolution deals have got hugely ranging powers and funding. But from housing to transport, all existing deals do include some powers and funding already that could be used positively to tackle climate change, restore nature, address those environmental inequalities. But even in well-established city regions, in our perspective, action is not on track to meet those climate targets. Regional mayors should be fully deploying the powers and resourcing they already have available to them. But whilst we've found some examples of specific impactful actions, all too often, climate is a sideline and not embedded into a mayor's strategic approach. Even existing powers like bus franchising haven't always been taken up, and I really hope there is going to be change now. Mayors can and should be doing more, but a lack of statutory duty or even a clear steer in national climate plans is really holding up progress. Mayors and the combined authorities are also hampered by the same patchy competitive funding and unhelpful national policy framework that's stalling action across the rest of local government. I live in Birmingham, okay? There's a lot you could say about Birmingham. But even here, even as a trailblazer area, Birmingham, the West Midlands Combined Authority area isn't meeting retrofit targets. And current devolution, although it shifts power upwards from local authorities as well as downwards from national government, and regional mayors, they're directly elected. Some are very well known in their areas. They can seem very remote to their communities. And community consultations are carried out in advance of devolution deals, but the subsequent deals are drawn up between the local authority and national government without community input. And it's been really interesting to hear about the importance of communities from fellow panelists this morning, because it is incredibly important. Is the current devolution deal improving local democracy in reality? And will this change under any new future deals? Because for me, that's really, really key. So what did the government need to do differently? In the elections earlier this year, in the local elections, 8 out of 10 of the regional city mayors elected signed Friends of the Earth Climate Action Pledge. Our grassroots groups will be holding those mayors to account for what they can do with existing powers and resources. But also, we do need to remove those national barriers that stand in their way. There are definitely encouraging signs: a commitment to stop competitive funding, a promise of an English devolution deal, a rollout of bus franchising. But what's needed is a much greater comprehensive policy alignment with that 2030 climate target. There's a promise of more consistent strategic planning powers, but planning reform has to align with climate targets. And I'm going to echo what Chris has just talked about. We need more housing, but the right housing in the right places, and new homes have to be energy efficient. We can't be costing people even more money, as well as the planet. And we're also concerned at Friends of the Earth that a duty to produce local growth plans is not linked to decarbonisation. Devolved authorities are the right place to design growth plans with their communities, but the focus has got to be about green jobs and investing in green infrastructure. If not, we will continue to fail to tackle fuel poverty, and we won't have a workforce with the skills to retrofit those homes, and communities would be even further left behind. Introducing a statutory climate duty would help ensure there's alignment across policy areas, but it has to be backed up by resourcing. There's been a decade of austerity, and without adequate investment in public transport and retrofitting, it isn't going to be genuine devolution. It's just shifting the problem. We also need local flexibility to implement those new powers. And in our view, what's needed is more scrutiny from local communities rather than interference from central government. So time's ticking. The new government needs to deliver that effective plan to meet those 2030 targets. It's not going to succeed without genuine devolution of power and resources to deliver it, but to local government. And we support that genuine devolution. And we believe that both mayoral combined authorities and local authorities working with their communities are best placed to deliver that effective action on climate and nature, as well as tackling those inequalities and boosting green growth. But with great power comes great responsibility. Mayoral combined authorities have moved too slowly. They need to scale up action. Our network of Friends of the Earth local action groups are motivated to work collaboratively with them to deliver this. And we firmly believe that we need to keep working together, NGOs and local government, to make sure the new government listens and the action that we need to see is delivered to achieve these vital goals. Thanks.
Well, I'm all fired up now, Victoria. Thank you. And we've got, I like that you've got the what we need and what we need to do locally, and how we align that speed-wise as well. And just going back to Christopher's comment on pylons and the power sector is going to have some big changes, and that community piece around how we're involved in that is going to be absolutely key. I mean, I'm in Calderdale, and we're on deep peat here. We've got a 302 megawatt scoping report out to put huge turbines on a triple SI with red flag species on it, and I'm all for we need that power, but what we know on that peat, honestly, and owned by whom? So there's a lot of tension coming when we go too fast, and there's a lot of problems coming when we go too slowly. So let's go over to some questions, and I wanted to kick off, which is sort of building on what Victoria just said, to address all of you just quickly. So do you think you mentioned we've got these multiple demands, we've got housing targets, we've got a need for economic growth, and this risk that they aren't aligned with nature protection and climate targets, which sort of get pushed to the back as economic development trumps all. So do you think we should be sending a message that the government's proposed new duty to produce local growth plans should be called local sustainable growth plans and should prioritise that low carbon growth over and above anything else? So can I just go in order of the way you spoke to Tom, then Marissa briefly, and Christopher, Victoria, and then Peter. Are you on my panel, or were you just introducing? I think we should hear from Peter as well. So we'll do a quick swizz round. It's quite a yes/no question, really. Sustainable growth plans. What about it?
Yes, I would say sustainable growth plans are incredibly important. I'm really encouraged by what the government has been doing. I'd say that from a position of bias, and what Ed Miliband has been leading on as the new Secretary of State in the department. I can see the concerns there are about reconciling the house building target with the sustainable concerns that we all have. But I think there is a way of telling that story, having those plans in place to make sure that we have sustainable growth. So, for instance, in Greater Manchester, we have gone through the Places for Everyone process, which took, 10 years to get through it. So I know, just mindful of what people have said about the clock is ticking, but we've got to a space where we've apportioned housing and industry allocations across Greater Manchester to be as fair as possible within Trafford itself. Marrying that up with the design guide that we have in place to look at sustainable, good housing and accommodation. I feel there are ways of taking forward sustainable growth that would fit in with within the government's agenda, and it's something, again, that the government could and will, I'm sure, learn from us at Greater Manchester level.
Thanks, Tom. Marissa?
Yeah, I mean, it's an obvious yes. Of course, we want sustainable growth. What's the definition of that? I think it needs to be sort of thought about. We've got some groups in Surrey who are looking at the whole donut economics and things and saying, actually, let's just not talk about growth at all. And then you've got other sort of parts that are driving for growth, including, as I mentioned, we've got percentages in the hundreds of extra housing coming at us in an area that's already stretched quite firmly. So what does this look like? What's realistic sustainable growth? Absolutely, it needs to be set out. We need to be really clear and on the same pathway with it, because everyone will have a different interpretation at the moment.
Yeah, good point. And your colleague Carolyn Mackenzie had put a comment in the chat, and I would encourage you, yeah, I can see questions coming in there, talking about where we're building. We need to tackle the transport issue too. So the 20-minute town concept of being able to get around that town, and then ideally it being well connected into public sector, into public transport as well, rather than just another bit of gridlock on a road. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Christopher, your thoughts on growth?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a yes, no, yes. But
so it's a bit of a naff question, really.
well, it's just that obviously there's a lot of different strategies and policies that comes out of government, companies, organizations, which have a great name, but then the substance behind it is not there. And likewise, there are some really boring titled things that actually have a kind of a real depth to them. So I'm less concerned about the wrapper and more interested in the chocolate bar.
Good one. And Stephen O'Keefe's just put in the chat, would we need a statutory definition for sustainability? Victoria.
Yeah, no, I'm conscious of time, but yeah, the sustainability is incredibly important. And I mean, I could fill the next 20 minutes with my frustration about houses being built that don't have heat pumps, that don't have sufficient insulation, that are built in the wrong places, that aren't sustainable in nature. And then we're talking about investment in jobs that are not green jobs, and it's just frustrating to see the waste. So sustainability is extraordinarily important, and we're going to go backwards if we're not careful around it. So yes.
So we're agreeing that those growth plans need to not just be any old economic growth, but very sustainable growth, which we define. Peter.
Yeah, Chris stole my thunder, Louise. Don't care what you call them, really, as long as they're informed by a meaningful definition of sustainable development. Older folk might remember earlier generations of planning reform. The debate about presumption in favour of development became presumption in favour of sustainable development. Didn't make it so, did it? But
no.
So lesson to be learned from that, I think.
Yeah, and I go running with a planner who's tearing her hair out that gas boilers are still put in on sites where heat networks or heat pumps could easily go in. I mean, don't get us started on that. So let's have a look at some of the questions we've got coming in. I've got a question here from Laurie Cuban, that regional authorities and mayoral combined authorities, where they exist, are required to develop local nature recovery strategies, but they currently have no remit or funding to deliver on those strategies. So what could their role be on that going forward? So can I pass that one to you, Tom, and then to Chris? We'll have a local nature recovery strategy. How are we going to make it happen if we've got no money for it?
Certainly, from a Greater Manchester perspective, we do have that flexibility, as been alluded to bring in funding to resource that piece of work. And I know at our level, having seen the State of Nature report for Greater Manchester, it made very grim reading, and that has been discussed at a combined authority level. So with the 10 leaders of the districts of Greater Manchester plus Andy Burnham as our mayor. So we are lucky in Greater Manchester, we have that flexibility to resource it. We have that ongoing monitoring and development of the local nature recovery strategy. And at the end of it, we see the value of doing it. And I think as one of the previous speakers said, it is one of the things that resonates most with our local populations is protecting nature, supporting nature, and it very much speaks to that. So from a political point of view, it's a really important thing for us to do. So fortunately in GM, we have the resource to do it. And again, learns for the government in terms of other areas is to give that flexibility and trust to other areas so that these things can be resourced and done properly and well.
Thanks, Tom. I'll go to Chris, and then actually, Marissa, I want to bring you in because you'll be producing an LNRS as well, won't you? Chris, thoughts?
I think, yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Councils have had 14 years of their budgets shrinking, demand for their services growing, and that kind of model doesn't look like it's changing anytime fast. But as just building on what Tom was saying, there is a huge amount of interest and community mobilization that can happen. So sometimes councils need to seed fund, need to work with that kind of ecosystem of organizations in there. There's a lot of expertise out there. It doesn't just have to be coming from the council. that seed funding, some of that leadership about how important this is, I think is really important. And then you'll get things, and there's innovative financial instruments that other councils have used, like eco bonds, where they've been able to kind of crowd in investment from that. And I think, we've got to map out what the opportunities are. Nobody's going to rock up to the town hall and just deposit a big bag of cash. So we need to look at what are the assets, that, the natural assets in that kind of wider strategy, and what are the things we're trying to achieve, because the health outcomes and avoiding costs later on for the public sector is really important and can be derived from good nature-based solutions. So I think it will require us, I think, just to kind of put the money in, some seed money, to crowd in some extra funding, but then the cost savings will come later on. Now, when you're in a budget crisis, that's a hard ask, but it's absolutely vital.
Thanks, Chris. And Marissa, I mean, you've talked about your local environmental improvement plans you want, but is your LNRS, your local nature recovery strategy, an opportunity for you prior to devolution?
Yeah, and I mean, we're in the midst of working on it now. It's complicated again because we've got to get so many stakeholders and partners. So it's a massive piece of work. We're using all of the tools hoping to use all of the tools that Christopher just outlined, leveraging private investment grants, working with other big organisations, National Trust, Wildlife Trusts, all of those sorts of entities. And I know, and the reason we put this really high up on our agenda in Surrey is I know the public all support this. There's barely anyone. You can still have some people who will push back on net zero, but everyone supports this nature, wildlife stuff pretty much. So it stands up there. But we have had to invest as well. I mean, we've hired 5 ecologists. We're putting a huge amount of time and resource into it. And not every authority would possibly be able to do that. And again, we have sort of fragmentation of our districts and boroughs perhaps doing something and someone else doing something. It's trying to get that kind of ownership and leadership to say, no, here's a big plan. Stop wasting your resources all over the place and put it into one direction, which then gives the stability to get that funding down the line. So that's again why we're asking for this overarching framework that allows us to have that authority and focus into it. Yeah, it will, as it stands at the moment, it means outcomes will be variable depending on how much energy and authority have, what their other focuses are, how committed the cabinet member is, all of those sorts of things. And what we want is consistency, because nature doesn't believe in sort of borders and councils and local authorities, does it? It needs to be something we do equally well across the whole country.
Thank you. I'm looking at my I'm listening and looking at a bunch of the bunch of questions, and I'm trying to think about, it's a devolution event. Let me think about, I'll take the National Planning Policy Framework question here. The right, somebody else has just highlighted one. Isaac, shall I ask this one, which we're on? Esme Macmillan asks, how can we ensure increased devolution is effective on delivering net zero to avoid it becoming just another layer of bureaucracy? So I'll put that one to Victoria first, and then circle that back round to, I think, Tom.
Thanks, Louise, and thanks, Esme, for the question. I spotted it in the chat as well, and I thought to myself, that's a really, really interesting one, because I think there's a risk at every level, any level of government, that bureaucracy can be the excuse for not actually delivering on impact. And I actually want to pick up what Marissa just described there, having councillors, cabinet members, leaders in local government who actually take an issue and drive it forward and really find solutions and look for the way forward, because I think that does have a really important part to play. And the leaders of councils, the mayors, are really important, recognising that this is this has to be delivered, and not creating more democracy in local government to prevent success. And it is really, really tricky. And I would hope, though, that through devolution, by sharing powers and that are not limited by smaller borders, that there can actually be a greater impact in because of the working across larger areas, because I think that is really important. I said I live in Birmingham. Things don't end at the border with Solihull. We are but what we can deliver together is going to be much stronger. And I feel that should we have to cut through that bureaucracy to have that greater impact.
Tom, what have we learned about not having more bureaucracy in Greater Manchester? We've been doing it for a while. Some of the local authorities lead on different issues, don't they? So like Oldham might lead on something and Trafford might lead on a different thing. So you're maxing out rather than creating extra layers. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, that is a great example of where it hasn't added another layer of bureaucracy and a speed bump along the road to what we all want to do. So we've got very good working relationships between our district climate change leads and the combined authority climate change team. And as Louise says, we pick up on different things in different areas so that it's not all, it's not all pressure in one place to deliver, and when we've only got a set amount of resources local authorities do have, it can cause a slowing down in the delivery that we want to see. What I would also say though is I think Victoria's absolutely right. You need that political leadership and drive there. Again, we're quite fortunate within Greater Manchester that we do have the buy-in from the mayor. We have a Green City region portfolio holder in me, and it is something that I take a great interest in. As well as that, we have leads across the Greater Manchester areas that come together as part of the Green City Region Partnership Board. We also have another partnership board which encompasses experts in their field, which can all feed in to what we want to do as a place-based approach to addressing the climate change crisis, working towards our 5-year environment plan. So there are, with anything like this, there are additional layers that come in. But if you're smart and you apportion things and you have that about right oversight, it can be incredibly effective. And I think, though I'd be interested to hear feedback from other people within GM, I think we've got something here that works. And I think it's something that other people could build on, that district and combined authority relationship, that interest and buy-in from political leadership, and that good working relationship with experts and other external organisations that help feed into the strategies that we put forward.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think I sit on a steering group for the 5-year environment plan in Greater Manchester. So I'm really trying not to favour Tom in this panel. I'd say my challenge to GM is that we haven't got the housing and planning right in at the heart of the climate piece. I think there's still a bit of a disjoint there, and I think we're aware of that, and we need to bring that in. And that just leads me into, I want to squeeze 2 questions, and then I'm going to try and squeeze a few more questions in. Is Councillor Emily O'Brien asks about the new National Planning Policy Framework that's out for consultation. I think it ends on the 24th. Noticeably doesn't have net zero front and centre, and it doesn't take a land use framework approach, but sets a direction around uses like food production and nature. She says she feels that takes a second place to house building. So what would you most have liked the government to put on the table in the current NPPF consultation to help us deliver? So I'm just sort of thinking, planning is obviously going to be a massive thing. Is there something you'd like in there? And Marissa, for you, you're obviously not a local planning authority, but you've got all your districts. Is there something you'd like to see in the NPPF that helps us deliver net zero and all your housing?
Well, I mean, I guess it goes back to, first of all, the definition of the sustainable development, sustainable growth. What does that look like? So for an authority like us, you've got 11 districts and boroughs thinking about where they're going to put their housing. It's not done in a strategic way where you can say, actually, where can we focus investment into sustainable travel networks? Where is it best placed to put these housing? Forgetting the kind of boundaries between boroughs and districts. Where does it work? Because at the moment, our money is going in all these small ways to try and create sustainable transport or renewable energy, connections, all of that kind of thing, but it's not giving bang for its buck. Whereas if we could actually focus it and do it in a more strategic county-wide way, we could then focus the funding into creating more sustainable development with all of the connectivity that's needed around them. So that kind of recognition to bring everyone together. We also want to kind of see something, there's a lot of slowness around planning that you'll hear developers talking about. There's lots of independent activities that aren't cross-related. So you've got lots of professionals, ecology, water, so forth, doing all their reports and putting their evidence bases and solutions forward, but they're being done on independent planning processes. If you did it in a coordinated way that fits into a bigger picture, that would allow us to sort of do all of our plans in a much more meaningful way, strategically figure out where we're putting that housing, and stop sort of squabbling over, you know, the sort of internal small things that go on when you're dealing with a certain area about where you're going to put housing, which then basically makes it unsustainable. We've also been trying to do something at our county where we've been looking at planning across all of the different bodies that deal with planning, the 11 district and boroughs, and saying, can we have a one example, a best practice, so developers coming in know what we expect.
Yes, yeah.
Good planning is, and we all adopt it, so it's not confusing. It's just what it is, and then
Just
potentially
some more shared work. I think that makes your case for devolution very strongly, doesn't it? I think across Greater Cambridgeshire have done some stuff like that, where they're working across. I think I just want to squeeze one more in, and then, well, I'm going to ask how we can harness the influence of regional mayors to influence national government to get that policy alignment and resourcing. So that's my sort of second question, but I also want to take Aaron Gould's question about the role local authorities might play in ensuring we get those electricity grid upgrades put in place. So we will have regional regional energy systems planners coming in. So at the moment, we're very held back by bits of the grid. So have we got time for a grid question? Anyone want to say something about the electricity grid quickly? No one's volunteering.
Well, I can quickly jump in.
Chris,
Local area energy
yeah.
planning, really important, really something that's going to unlock that energy decarbonisation piece. There is no national framework for LEAPs, as they're called, across this country. There is in Wales, and there was also funding available for councils to be doing a local area energy plan.
And LHES in Scotland, yeah.
Absolutely. So if there is, maybe GB Energy should fund or give some money to councils to do some local area energy planning, which is mapping the assets, looking at what the art of the possible is. I don't know how we get to an energy decarbonisation target by 2030 without knowing where the opportunities are in our local areas, and then we can start having the conversations about where they go, and you know, that's done collaboratively. The government is looking at attacking some of these kind of long wait times in the grid, and so is the sector, the energy sector. A lot of these zombie projects that are in the pipeline that've got no funding or plans attached to them, you know, they need to be taken out so that we can speed up grid connections and we can get that get moving towards that 2030 target as soon as possible.
Thanks. I've messed up there because I asked 2 questions and I've got 2 minutes left. So I'm going to have to say, let's get the mayors to use their influence to do all the stuff that we said we want in the session today. And we've got a richness of questions and comments in the chat. And I imagine poor old Sandra and Isaac will have to write something about this afterwards. Sandra, are we sharing a write-up with participants? Have I got you? I've put you on the spot here, really.
Hi. Yes, I think there's certainly a plan to write a summary of the event. So Isaac, I assume we can share that with everyone who attended.
Yeah, as well as the recording, which we can send out to people.
Yeah, and that will be linked from so I've put the link again in the chat to where you can find information on the Blueprint Coalition, and yeah, we'll put that up there as well, and we've got that already.
I'd love to have had longer because we've got so many questions and so much to discuss, and some brilliant people who are here in the room who I'd love to catch up with and hear from you. But thank you. We're out of time. Thank you so much to the organisers, Sandra and Isaac, and to UK 100 and Ashton, and Peter at Blueprint, and then to our panel, Tom, Christopher, Victoria and Marissa. Thank you so much for your time today, and participants for your questions, and keep watching Blueprint. Look at what they're calling for, and let's get this message across to government and we can get delivering. So thank you everybody, and have a lovely day. And it's stopped raining here now, so I can see Tom's got sun as well. So thanks so much, and see you all soon.